Most of the time, our roles as college students, as professors, we go through our days thinking about presidential primaries or Oscars, or it's Thursday night, why am I in the Meek Hall, or beating Alabama next time. And we don't think about other things, such as the fact that there are people who are working all the time to make the world a safer place. And we're fortunate that one of those people is with us tonight. It's not too great a stretch of the imagination to think that if 15 people would commandeer civilian airliners and fly them into buildings, as they did on September the 11th, 2001, that the devastation through either non-government or government use of a nuclear weapon is certainly something that it looms in all our lives. For most of her career, Secretary Gottemoeller has thought about these things that we think about every once in a while, every day. And she's worked at the highest levels of government and in civilian life to make the world a safer place for all of us. And tonight, we're so glad and fortunate that she's here to talk with us. The format for this evening calls for her to have some prepared remarks, followed by your questions and her answers. So let's welcome Undersecretary of State Rose Gottemoeller.
It's a great honor to be here and a great pleasure. I've never been to Ole Miss before. I have to tell you, I've never been to Mississippi before, and I'm ashamed to say I've never been to Mississippi before, but I'm really grateful and appreciative to have this opportunity. So thank you for the introduction, Charlie, and thank you to the Meek School of Journalism and New Media for hosting this event. I have to say that it's a group of Ole Miss students who got me down here. If you haven't seen their film, Atomic Mississippi, I highly recommend it to you. It's very good. I thought it was a great historical account of the nuclear testing that happened right here in Mississippi in the 1960s. And I was really pleased to see young people taking an interest in these topics, and I'm really pleased to see you all here tonight because I wanted to talk to you really about two big topics. One is nuclear security, how we keep our hands on nuclear weapons and fissile material, plutonium, highly enriched uranium, so it doesn't fall into the hands of terrorists. And the second thing I wanted to talk to you about is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and how we want to create a permanence in what we have today, which is a moratorium on nuclear testing. We want to create this as a permanent legal arrangement that will prevent the specter of what happened here in Mississippi in the 1960s from ever happening again. Since the early 1990s and even before that, the looming threat of nuclear war seemed to drift away, however, for the average American. Have any of you around the room seen Bridge of Spies? Did you see that movie? Yeah. Well, you remember the scene when Tom Hanks' character's son was watching the civil defense film about Mr. Duck and telling them all to duck and cover, telling the kids to duck and cover. Well, I saw that film in third grade. I hadn't seen it since third grade, but when it came up in the movie, it immediately took me back to those days. I was living in Dearborn, Michigan at the time, and yes, we did duck and cover drills, but I don't expect that any of you have done a duck and cover drill in elementary school. So those kinds of things are long gone, and I think it's a good thing they are long gone, but there are still thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons in the world and hundreds of tons of the kind of nuclear material, fissile material, that could create a nuclear weapon. So I wanted to say a few more words about how we think about nuclear security in this kind of context. 32 years ago, President Reagan pronounced clearly and with conviction that there can only be one policy for preserving our precious civilization in this modern age. A nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought. That was 32 years ago. Those are the days when we cared about, nuclear war between two countries, when we cared about deterring the Soviet Union from attacking us, and so we built up our nuclear arsenal, and they did the same. But President Reagan's belief that nuclear war can never be won and should never be fought became a very solid basis for pursuing bilateral nuclear arms reduction with the USSR and later with the Russian Federation. You'll notice that I was the chief negotiator of the New START Treaty, which was brought into force in 2011. It's now 5 years old. We just passed its 5th birthday, and it's continuing to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia with full eyes on. We have inspectors that go over to Russia 18 times a year, inspect what they're doing. They come and inspect us. So it's a good disarmament effort, very traditional now, been going on since the 1980s. But we have to ask ourselves, how do President Reagan's policies apply today when that state-to-state relationship is not so important as the specter of nuclear weapons or fissile material falling into the hands of terrorists? And I was glad Charlie began with that image about 9/11. If you can just imagine if those planes had not been planes crammed with jet fuel, which was tragic enough, but planes that had a nuclear weapon in their belly, what that would have done to New York City. So we are really, really focused now on trying to do everything we can to keep nuclear weapons and fissile materials out of the hands of terrorists. The core of our efforts is to acknowledge that nuclear terrorism is the greatest threat today to our collective security. This was a threat that President Obama hit in his Prague speech in April of 2009. He hit that message very, very hard. Since then, the United States has been working to limit and reduce this nuclear threat while at the same time maintaining our nuclear arsenal as a safe, secure, and effective deterrent against states that still have nuclear capability. So, where nuclear security is concerned and keeping nuclear weapons out of the hands of terrorists, the top priority is pretty basic: physical protection of nuclear materials, physical protection of warheads. We're working to enhance nuclear security culture around the world at sensitive facilities, preventing malicious insiders from stealing nuclear material and know-how. We work with nuclear operators and countries that have civil nuclear capability, regulators, to make sure that they have good personnel reliability programs, that they really ensure the trustworthiness of their staff. So these are what I call bread and butter programs. They're not very sexy, they're not very glamorous, but personnel reliability is all important in this arena. Beyond material control, we're working with international partners to build capabilities also to prevent, detect, and respond to nuclear and radiological smuggling attempts. We have to work together to make sure that nuclear smugglers and their networks are uncovered, apprehended, and held accountable. We're also aware that radioactive fallout doesn't pay attention to international borders, and neither do nuclear smugglers. So if a nuclear terrorist sabotaged a nuclear facility in one country, it would have an impact on the entire region around that country. A nuclear crisis anywhere is a nuclear crisis everywhere. And so we have to take a broad international approach, trying to put together international partnerships to tackle this problem. So that's one of the reasons why President Obama started in 2009 with a series of summit meetings called the Nuclear Security Summits. This year, just over a month from now, 31st of March and 1st of April, will be the 4th in this series of nuclear security summits. And so it will build on the 3 previous summits to put an emphasis on establishing an international architecture for tackling these nuclear security problems, getting nations to make commitments to do such simple things. Once again, I talked about personnel reliability, bread and butter, simple things. But simple things like building better fences, around their nuclear facilities, making sure that there are bars on the windows and locks on the doors. When we started working on this problem back in the 1990s, when I was working for President Clinton, I went to the plutonium facility in the so-called MIAC facility in the southern Urals. And they said, you know, come on in. You want to see what the warehouse looks like where we have our plutonium? Tons of plutonium, enough plutonium to make thousands of nuclear weapons. They said, come on in, we'll show it to you. Well, the door was this big old wooden door, and it had a huge antique lock on it, and the guy had a big key. He turns the key, he pulls the door open. I walk in, and he says, come on, I'll show you some of the plutonium. So we walk across, there's a bunch of buckets let down into the floor. He undoes a wax seal holding a wire across the top of the bucket, undoes this wax seal, opens it up, and pulls a bucket of plutonium out of these, they were like little ditches in the floor. He says, here, feel it, it's warm. And he puts it back down again, puts the wax seal back on. We go out, turns the lock. Well, I looked at the windows in there. There weren't even any bars on the windows. So one of the things that we did, working together, the Russians realized they had a problem because their society was opening up after the breakup of the Soviet Union. They realized they had a problem because these secret cities, you know, were getting to the point where anybody could get in there. It wasn't such a closed society anymore. And so we worked very closely with them during the 1990s to put in place higher fences, bars on windows, better doors, and in the case of the MIAC facility for plutonium, we built a brand new, with them in cooperation, built a brand new secure storage facility. So those are the kind of, again, I wanted to give you a feel. This is not exciting, sophisticated, you know, high technology work. It's very, very basic, but very important to get every country around the world to accept both the dire nature of the threat and also then focus on a high standard of physical protection, high standard of personnel reliability. And so these summits have done just that. They've shone a spotlight on this problem for countries around the world, and it's really gotten countries to take this problem seriously. They've really yielded some amazing results. For example, there was highly enriched uranium spread around the world at research reactors. Highly enriched uranium is one of the fissile materials, like plutonium, that can go directly into a nuclear weapon. So as part of the summit series, we've gotten countries to commit to taking that HEU out of their research reactors, converting them to low-enriched uranium for research purposes, and really disposing of that HEU. So we've been able to dispose of 2,697 kilograms of vulnerable nuclear material, and that material could produce over 100 nuclear bombs. So it's been very, very successful in what it has been able to accomplish. So once again, I realize nuclear terrorism is an attention grabber, but fissile material control, portal monitoring, personnel reliability, they all sound kind of boring. But let me assure you, they're really existential efforts, really existentially important to our security and the security of our friends and allies and countries around the world. If we don't get nuclear security right, then nothing else really matters. Let me turn now to the second topic that I wanted to discuss before we open things up for questions, and that is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. There are many, many tools and mechanisms beyond nuclear security that we use to reduce the nuclear threat. One might be familiar to some people around this room, some of them who worked on the film I was talking about, Atomic Mississippi, and that is the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, or CTBT for short. We and the Soviets and others have conducted over 2,000 nuclear explosive tests over the last 71 years, including the 2 test series that occurred in the salt domes near Hattiesburg here in Mississippi in 1964 and 1966. The main U.S. testing location, however, was in Nevada. We now know it as the Nevada National Security Site, but for many years it was called the Nevada Test Site. From 1951 to 1992, 928 nuclear explosive tests were conducted here in the United States, 100 of which were above ground. These above-ground tests, which took place in the 1950s and early 1960s, were designed to prove the effectiveness, safety, and security of our nuclear weapons. They also had the consequence of distributing radioactive fallout downwind from the site. Over time, radioactive and cancer-causing particles such as strontium-90 ended up in baby milk and other agricultural products, eventually ending up in the bones and teeth of children. Beyond the multiple radioactive hotspots in Utah, where I've been visiting over the last couple of years, hotspots were detected throughout the West and as far away as Long Island in New York on the East Coast. So in that period, in the early 1960s, growing public concerns about the dangers of nuclear explosive testing in the atmosphere actually ran into another major crisis of that area, and that is the Cuban Missile Crisis. As an initial step leading us back from the brink of nuclear war, President John F. Kennedy called for a complete ban on nuclear explosive testing in 1963. But we were able to achieve only part of that goal in the 1960s. Indeed, it was in 1963, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, that the Limited Test Ban Treaty was agreed. That banned tests in water, in space, and in the atmosphere. And that was a good thing, so we no longer had the problem of strontium-90 particles ending up in our milk supply. But we did not reach a comprehensive ban on nuclear testing because at the time we didn't know how to monitor and verify it. We didn't know how we would know if a country was cheating. So that work took a number of years, and we did develop the technical tools we would need to negotiate a verifiable comprehensive test ban treaty, but it took until the Clinton administration in the mid-1990s that we were able to negotiate a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. And this was a multilateral effort. Today, 183 nations have signed the treaty and 163 have ratified it. We were the first country to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty in 1996, but the Senate failed in 1999 to ratify the treaty, to give its advice and consent to ratification. At the time, there were two main issues that concerned the senators, and they were good reasons why they failed to give their advice and consent at that time. The two main issues were our ability to maintain the stockpile without explosive nuclear testing through so-called stockpile stewardship, and monitoring and verification of compliance of the treaty. But today, the situation is much different. We've come a long distance since 1993. First of all, our science-based stockpile stewardship program is ensuring that we do not need to conduct nuclear explosive tests in order to ensure the safety, security, and effectiveness of the nuclear weapons that we maintain in our arsenal. In fact, the last U.S. nuclear test was in 1992, 24 years ago. We are maintaining an international test moratorium. In this century, in the 21st century, the only country that is tested is North Korea, most recently just a short time ago in January. So it's been 24 years since we conducted a nuclear test. Today, the Department of Energy's Stockpile Stewardship Program, which is a suite of experimental, diagnostic, and supercomputing capabilities, allows us to model and simulate nuclear devices without nuclear explosive testing. With this program in place, the directors of our national laboratories affirm the safety and security and effectiveness of the nuclear arsenal for our president every single year. In fact, they believe we actually understand more about how nuclear weapons work today than we did during the period of explosive nuclear testing. The ability to monitor and verify compliance with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty was the other big question, the second great big question. And This, too, is a question that has been dealt with in the intervening almost 20 years since we last attempted ratification. The international monitoring system, the heart of the verification regime, was just a concept 2 decades ago, but today it's nearly complete. It's technically advanced. It is deployed all over the world, including 35 stations here in the United States. They can detect relatively low-yield nuclear explosions. Well, it does not garner the attention that something like a smartphone does. The IMS is actually one of the greatest technical accomplishments of the modern world. In addition to its verification role, the IMS has proven its ability to contribute critical scientific data to benefit mankind. Since the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami in 2004, the IMS has contributed critical seismic data to international tsunami warning systems. Additionally, after the Fukushima nuclear crisis, we saw how the IMS system can track radioactivity around the world. The IMS is based at the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization in Vienna. It's a high-rise building on the outskirts of Vienna. And within a couple of days of that power plant accident at Fukushima, the IMS site on the rooftop of this high-rise in Vienna was detecting radioactivity that had moved around the Earth from Fukushima. So IMS is a really great capability and one that is spread all over the world with many sites, as I mentioned, here in the United States. We've also developed on-site inspection elements of the CTBT verification regime. It's advanced quite significantly. With an in-force CTBT, we could get inspectors on the ground at the site of a suspected nuclear test, which we can't do today. We have no rights today, in the case of North Korea, to go and ask them to do an on-site inspection. With the treaty in force, we would have that opportunity. So, plain and simple, the CTBT is good for U.S. and international security. It is a key part of leading nuclear weapon states toward a goal of reduced reliance on nuclear weapons and reduced likelihood of a nuclear arms race. An in-force CTBT will make it difficult for states without nuclear weapons to develop advanced nuclear weapons capabilities. An in-force treaty will also make it hard for states with more established nuclear weapons capabilities from confirming the performance of advanced nuclear weapon designs that they have not tested successfully in the past. Because of this, an in-force CTBT will help to constrain regional arms races, and we care about this particularly in Asia. The new weapons developers are in Asia: China, India, Pakistan. This is where we need to prevent new nuclear arms racing, and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty can place significant speed bumps in the way of that arms race in Asia. So I think that's another good reason, backing up the point about our own national security. So I like to say, all told, it's in our interest to close the door on nuclear explosive testing forever. Despite the clear merits of the treaty, it's been a long time since the CTBT was on the front page of U.S. newspapers. I bet you around the room haven't thought much about the CTBT, although I understand some of you may have been studying it in class, so I'm eager to hear your views in our question and answer period. So what we are doing, and why I'm here in Mississippi, is to really get the message out that it's time to take a new look at this treaty. It's time to develop grassroots interest, discussion, debate about the treaty, and to begin to prepare to bring the treaty back to the Senate, back to Washington for debate and discussion on Capitol Hill. It's not going to be a straightforward or easy process by any means, but people need to know about the value of the treaty, and they also need to understand about the history of nuclear testing, as well as about why the treaty is so important to our national security. So I mentioned that I'm here in Mississippi because I was drawn here by this film. There's a group of very talented journalism students here at Ole Miss they're already ahead of the game in terms of understanding many of the issues I've been talking about today. I mentioned the film Atomic Mississippi. I just had a chance to watch it last night, and I have no doubt for them this is just the beginning of some great things for their careers. So I recommend taking a look at the film if you haven't seen it. It's on YouTube. There's no doubt that understanding our history is the best way to plan for the future. So again, congratulations to those of you who worked on the film. With regards to the future, people always ask me, how can you ever expect to get this treaty ratified? It's tough to get anything done on Capitol Hill. Well, the reason I say we can do it is because I had the experience of ratification of the New START treaty. And New START was hard to get across the finish line, but we did have the opportunity to work with the Senate. They were ready to work with us to ask deep technical questions, to dig down deep and really understand the value of the treaty. And so I think that we can do it again. Senators should have every opportunity to ask questions, many, many questions, briefings, hearings, very classified types of information provided for them until they are satisfied. We answered over 1,000 questions for the record in the New START treaty, but that's how good policy is made. For them to dig down deep and develop that understanding, I think that they will see the value of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty as well. We are confident that we have a good case to make. As our former Secretary of State from the Reagan era said, this is Mr. George Shultz, senators might have been right voting against the treaty some years ago, but they would be right to vote for the treaty today. So we have a lot of work to do, but it is a worthy goal, as I said. An in-force Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty will benefit the United States and indeed the whole world. With that, I'm going to wrap up and look forward to your questions. I think that from what I understand, hearing from both some of you and some of your professors since I arrived here late this afternoon, I'm glad that there's a good interest in both the process of treaty formulation, the process of diplomacy, the issues surrounding nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence, and nuclear arms control. And I really want to congratulate you for that interest and that academic deep dive that you're doing, because I think it is really valuable to have that understanding and understand that even though nuclear weapons aren't on the front page of the papers every day, nevertheless, they are still an abiding issue, still a very dangerous matter for us. And this new factor of the possibility that nuclear weapons might fall into the hands of terrorists, that's something that is going to be a continuing issue for your generation to wrestle with. So we hope to do everything we can to pass along tools that will help you with that process. But I know you're going to have some good ideas as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I really look forward to your questions. So thank you. Thanks. So, questions? Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
How far away do you think we are from having an international policing agency for nuclear weapons?
Far, far away. And let me say, I think that, think about the history of how we've done negotiation over the years. Up to this point, and really since the Cuban Missile Crisis, it has been a matter for the USSR and the United States to focus on nuclear disarmament. But the reason has been very, very good. The United States and Soviet Union built up tens of thousands of nuclear weapons in our arsenals. At the height of our nuclear arsenal in 1967, we had over 32,000 nuclear weapons in our arsenal. And the Soviets, according to their former Minister of Atomic Energy, built 45,000 nuclear weapons. So the Cold War, arms race produced this enormous nuclear overhang that we and the Russians have ever since been slowly but surely reducing. When New START is completes its implementation in 2018, we'll be down to 1,550 deployed nuclear warheads. So that's a huge drop. We still have some in reserve, but it's a huge drop from the 32,000 that we built up in the 1950s and 1960s. So the point is, this problem is a problem between Washington and Moscow that we're still wrestling with from the Cold War, and we still have work to do in that regard. Second thing is other countries around the world. I mentioned the new entrants, particularly in Asia, China, Pakistan, India. They are now building up themselves. We don't see that arms racing tendency that we saw, during the Cold War, but still they're building up their arsenals and they have their own interests. So what we need to do is try to get to them and get them to see that their national security interests are actually endangered by depending on nuclear weapons. If you can imagine, nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists, you worry about places that have a lot of terrorist problems. So I think that we have to work them in a very, very focused way with the countries that are really the ones that are building up at the present time. And we have to work to continue to build down that Cold War, that Cold War capability that we had. But when you get other countries in the mix, a very large multilateral effort, sometimes the focus gets lost. So that's why I say we need to keep the eye on the prize of getting the weapons reduced and eliminated, and under very, very good physical protection and control as well. Now, international partners can help, and there are many countries around the world. I mentioned the nuclear security summits. These are countries, many of them have civil nuclear power programs, and they too need to be responsible about how they handle the nuclear material that goes into their civil nuclear power program. So there are good ways that we can cooperate in a multilateral way with them. But I think, for the countries that have nuclear weapons, they have to keep their focus on reducing and eliminating them. Okay? Yes, sir.
In terms of trying to protect nuclear material in places that are war zones like Iraq and Ukraine, what is it really that anyone could do to try and stop that without, breaching that country's sovereignty? Because I know there's a news story recently that some material did disappear in Iraq, and there's a big scare that ISIS might get its hands on it.
Yeah, let me just draw the contrast for you. What disappeared recently in Iraq was some lithium from a radiography machine. So I want to draw the contrast between fissile material and nuclear weapons that produce, a nuclear explosion if they go off, and so-called radiological dispersal devices. That's the threat that, like this lithium source, somebody goes into a hospital, grabs a radiological source used for cancer treatment and packs it in an IED with some normal explosives and explodes it, creating what we call a dirty bomb effect. So it's radiological contamination, but it's not a nuclear explosion. It's not a weapon of mass destruction in that it wouldn't kill tens of thousands of people at one go, but it could really sow panic. It could, we call it a weapon of economic effect, because depending on the radiological source, it could contaminate a large part of a city and, prevent economic activity from taking place there until the cleanup took place. So, but I agree, that example shows that there is an interest among, terrorist groups in getting their hands on something that will sow panic, that will not only cause destruction, but sow panic and cause other kinds of damage as well. So we really have to pay attention to those problems also. And in the context of these nuclear security summits, we've also been working on ways to get countries to pay more attention to protecting radiological sources at hospitals or at universities where research is being done. Make sure that they catalog them, that they keep very good inventories, and that they protect them as well. So that's another, thank you for that question. It's another part of the problem. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Recently, there was a 60-minute story, and I think there was a CBS story as well about our own nuclear warheads and kind of outdated computer systems as well as some like physical malfunctioning parts. And I was curious, how do we like increase our own security with our own nuclear weapons as well as create standards for these new countries who are building nuclear like arsenals who don't have the technology or the understanding of how to keep these weapons safe, especially if we're not doing it as much ourselves.
Right. The problems that you are pointing to are the problems that come from these systems, excuse me, actually being at this point, 50-year-old technology. A lot of the warhead designs came from the 1950s into the 1960s. Many of our warheads and missile systems, the problems that you talk about came when people realized that our missile systems are using very old software, for example, very old technology. And it's the issue that surrounds the debate now over modernization of our nuclear delivery systems. Because people are saying, look, these were built some of them in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. The manufacturers who made them anymore, they don't exist anymore. In some cases I remember that story talked about they had a single wrench that they had to send around by FedEx from missile base to missile base because there wasn't a wrench manufacturer anymore, to make this particular wrench that was used in the maintenance of the missiles. So this is a very, very important issue that we're focused on now as we think about, okay, obviously it's time to think about retiring these missiles. What do we do for our nuclear delivery systems in the future? Do we build the same kind? Do we build the same numbers? We have to think about budget issues. So there's a real focus on this set of problems right now in Washington. It also is related to the warheads themselves. And so we have what is called our life extension programs going on for the warheads. And these are programs that are taking the non-nuclear components, not the nuclear components, but like, the electronics and so forth, some of which very old electronics, and replacing these non-nuclear components with more modern components while leaving, the nuclear material intact. So we see this as a way not only to extend the life of the warheads, but also as a way to make it possible to reduce, for me as the Undersecretary for Arms Control, it's important to think about ways to continue to reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons. And as we are able to extend the lives and we're sure that some of these warheads are capable of performing into the future in a safe, secure, and effective manner, it gives us an opportunity then to reduce some of the reserves, because if you're confident that the warhead will work for years into the future, you can think about, we keep a lot of warheads in reserve because we want to make sure that we have enough in case some breakdowns occur. So those are the kinds of issues that we are very much grappling with in Washington right now, and that 60 Minutes show, I think, was important in highlighting the issues for our public, for the international community as well. But it, I think, has led us in the direction of some very responsible and thorough approaches as we think about what we need to do for maintaining these weapons into the future. Just a word about, I didn't really hit very hard on the President's Prague speech, but what President Obama has said is that we need to slowly, over time, reduce and eliminate nuclear weapons so that eventually we get to zero nuclear weapons, to the peace and security, as the President puts it, of a world without nuclear weapons. He's not naive about this. He says this isn't going to happen in my lifetime, but as a focal point of U.S. policy, we have to reduce steadily and eliminate nuclear weapons because of the threat that nuclear weapons might fall into the hands of terrorists. We cannot deal with this nuclear threat through deterring it, as we did during the Cold War years. We have to deal with it by getting rid of them so they are not ever going to fall into the hands of terrorists. And that's been the goal of policy. But at the same time, the president has emphasized that as long as nuclear weapons exist, the United States must maintain a safe, secure, and effective arsenal. So when I've been talking just now about, having to look at new systems, consider what we're going to buy in the future, make sure our warheads continue to operate in a safe, secure, and effective way for years into the future, it's in that context that we are steadily reducing and eliminating nuclear weapons. So, but as long as they exist, we got to make sure they work. Yes, please.
Going along, further question about terrorism in the Middle East. We know Iran, the openly nuclear components in Iran. How is it that we're keeping that out of the hands of people like ISIS? Are we involved enough?
Actually, the Iran deal, which was just reached this, last summer and has now gone into implementation, it has actually been very effective even so far in shutting off the 3 pathways that the Iranians had going to acquire the fissile material, the nuclear material to build a bomb. They had not yet actually built a bomb, they hadn't tested a bomb, but they were pursuing fissile material along 3 pathways. Highly enriched uranium, that's all those centrifuges you heard about. They had to get rid of the centrifuges. They have a few left in the country, but compared to the thousands, tens of thousands that they were building, they have very few left. They also had to ship out all of their highly enriched uranium that was enriched to a high level. They are able to keep a small amount at just over 3% enrichment, which is suitable for a civil nuclear power program, but you can't build a bomb with 3% low enriched uranium. So the pathway to high enriched uranium is shut off for them. They poured cement into their plutonium reactor. So the Iraq reactor is now no longer capable of producing plutonium. That's the second pathway to fissile material. And the third pathway we've always been concerned about is their ability to illicitly build these secret facilities and therefore illicitly and secretly acquire capability. And the amount of inspection capacity that has now been put in place under the aegis of the International Atomic Energy Agency is really incredible, and that will continue into the foreseeable future to prevent them from being able to build up illicit secret facilities for, again, building up their bomb-making capacity. So I feel the reason they wanted to do this, and this is a case for those of you who study these levers in the international community. Obviously, the lever for the Iranians was they wanted out from under sanctions. This is a case, I haven't seen a case like this of effective sanctions pressure since the sanctions embargoes on South Africa back in the late 80s and early 1990s. So the effect of sanctions was an important lever that led Iran to really not only agree the deal, but implement it in record time between midsummer and the early days of January. I cannot still believe that they took such fast action, for example, to get rid of those thousands of centrifuges that they got rid of. So it's been quite an effective effort. And I think there is a benefit in what you're talking about, that we were concerned and have been concerned that nuclear materials, if the Iranians had a big stock of nuclear materials, they would hang on to them pretty well because they wanted to build up a nuclear weapons program. We were convinced of that. But nevertheless, They were in a very dangerous neighborhood where we're concerned about ISIS, we're concerned about other terrorist groups, and so there's an added benefit to the deal in that it addresses that problem as well. Yes, sir, please.
I was just wondering, with the Iran nuclear deal and the current talks going on with China and sanctioning North Korea for their nuclear program, do you believe this has already put a greater focus on Asian nuclear programs and possibly, bringing greater focus back to the CTBT to bring up to Congress?
I hope so, and frankly, the major Asian problem we have today, I mentioned, is North Korea. And the fact that not only have they had 4 nuclear tests now, but they may be headed to a 5th nuclear test. They are, keen to develop this capacity and develop it in a way that will continue to spur, I think, others to consider proliferation. We have allies in the region that at least some political parties in the ROK in South Korea, now starting to talk about acquiring their own nuclear weapons capacity. So we're concerned about, as we were concerned about Iran being a spur to proliferation in the Middle East, Saudis, Egyptians, others developing nuclear weapons, we have to be concerned about, the North Koreans and their ability to spur proliferation in Asia as well. So that's the major, I think, issue that we have to wrestle with now. Iran was one big problem. We're on the path to dealing with that, I think, effectively. So now we have to wrestle with the problem with North Korea. But I do think that having a comprehensive test ban treaty in place, North Korea would have to agree to join us in a comprehensive test ban treaty in order for the treaty to enter into force. So that's a big deal. But if they decide, and the lever becomes that they too want to improve their economic circumstances, they want to enter more into the international community. We don't see that right now. We don't see that today. But that could be one lever for them in the future as well. So we'll see. I was just with Secretary Kerry when he was at the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago, and he is evidently very, very interested in trying to make progress on North Korea in the coming year. He just was at the State Department 2 days ago with the Chinese foreign minister talking about wanting to make progress in this area. So I know this is one area of priority for him in 2016. We'll see what kind of progress we can make. But I do, just to come back to your question and the way you ask it, is there a new impetus for the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty because of what's going on in Asia? Yes, precisely so. I mentioned already China, India, Pakistan, they are the potential nuclear arms racers today. But the North Korea case, they're a wild card. They're not in that arms race, kind of situation as that triumvirate is. But they are such a wild card that I think they're very dangerous for Asian security. And so, yes, there's multiple reasons to look at the CTBT from the direction of the threats emerging in Asia. Thank you. Any further questions? Thanks again.